ladies and gentlemen.
Let's be seated, please. Thank you.
It's okay. It's called life. People make mistakes.
Your Excellency, Dr. Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security of the African Union Commission, Honorable Ministers of Government, Honorable Members of Parliament, Chef de Cabinet, Office of the President of the UN General Assembly, Excellencies, Permanent Representatives, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic and Consular Corps, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This morning, I'm privileged to welcome you all to the I'm privileged this morning to welcome you to the retreat for the
It's human.
Thank you. Good morning. I just want to warmly welcome you to the retreat for the ambassadors of the C10 that is held here today. And all this while, in the welcome to the retreat of the permanent representatives of the African Union Committee of 10, C10 in the reform of the United Nations Security Council. In 2005, the African Union Committee of 10 were given a concise mandate by the assemblies of heads of states and government to promote, advance, and canvass a common African position as set out in the Enzowidi Consensus and the Sirte Declaration. In the years pursuant, the C10 has explored means to further enhance the cohesion and unity of the African Union member states on the reform of the UN Security Council, and to provide further guidance to the C10 permanent missions in New York and Addis Ababa on substantive and procedural issues. This retreat is actually meant to further deliberations on this laudable initiative, which is quite challenging. But then we know with all hands on deck and the commitment of the chair and coordinator and the heads of state plus the representative, we will definitely move the process forward. So I want to warmly welcome all of you here. And this time I want to invite the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, a personality who has been committed to promoting the foreign service, the foreign policy objectives of Sierra Leone, especially with regards to the C10 and the UN Security Council. Honorable Minister, sir.
Your Excellency, Dr. Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, Commissioner of Political Affairs, Peace and Security of the African Union, Honorable Ministers of Government here present, Honorable Members of Parliament, Chef de Cabinet, Office of the President of the United Nations General Assembly, Excellencies, Permanent Representatives, Excellencies, Members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me at the outset warmly welcome you to the historic and hospitable city of Freetown on behalf of His Excellency Dr. Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, and on behalf of the people of our great country. We are honored to host you, and I trust that amidst the important deliberations ahead, you will find a moment to explore and enjoy the rich heritage, beauty, and culture of our capital. This important retreat, convened by the government of Sierra Leone as coordinator of the Committee of 10 Heads of State and Government of the African Union, in collaboration with the African Union Commission, marks a key step in the implementation of the Oyala Plan of Action, endorsed at the 37th Ordinary Session of the African Union Assembly in February 2024. It is also in pursuant to the decision of the 38th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of the African Union, which welcomed the holding of the C10 Ambassadors Retreat here in Freetown, Sierra Leone. Following the C10 Consultative Summit in Oyala in November 2023, and the decisions of our heads of state and government, a forward-looking strategy was adopted to advance the common African position on the reform of the United Nations Security Council. This strategy, grounded in the Eswatini Consensus and SAT Declaration, emphasizes active participation in the intergovernmental negotiation and sustained engagement with key global stakeholders. As part of this strategy, the C10 held a high-level ministerial meeting with permanent members of the Security Council during the 79th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. That meeting fostered candid dialogues on practical pathways to achieve a common African position and reiterated Africa's demand to be treated as a special case in the reform process, recognizing, of course, the continent's unique historical exclusion. Encouragingly, this position is increasingly reflected in the intergovernmental negotiation process, including in the revised element paper of the co-chairs, which acknowledges Africa's legitimate demands and the urgent need to address the long-standing historical injustice meted to our continent. Moreover, the C10 was instrumental in securing the inclusion of a strong reference to Africa's case in the contribution of the IGN process to the Pact for the Future. For the first time, a formal United Nations process has explicitly called for redressing the historical injustice against Africa as a priority. And it has recognized Africa as a special case. Let me emphasize, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that correcting this decades-long exclusion of our continent is not only a political necessity, but a moral imperative. Only by fully implementing the common African position can of Africa's marginalization. I therefore urge all participants to reflect deeply and constructively on today's discussions to shape a robust outcome document that must contain clear, actionable, and time-bound recommendations. Sierra Leone remains steadfast in its commitment to a reformed and more representative Security Council, one that reflects the geopolitical realities of our time, and in which Africa has a fair and equal voice. Africa must remain united and must continue to speak with one voice. The presence of His Excellency, the President, Dr. Julius Maada Bio, and the coordinator of the C10 of Heads of State and Government of the African Union here reaffirms his unwavering dedication to delivering on the collective African mandate for a just and equitable reform of the United Nations Security Council. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as we proceed with our deliberations, I urge us all to remain focused on the overarching objectives of this retreat, which include developing an aid memoir to guide engagement with the P5, other UN and interest groups within the IGN process, formulating a clear roadmap of activities with specific timelines and benchmarks for advancing the common African position and enhancing our engagement with strategic partners. Strategically preparing for the presentation of the common African position as a model for African Union member states during the IGN in the 79th session of the General Assembly, and enhancing the model for future dialogues, crafting concise messaging for inclusion in statement by African Union member states at the 80th United Nations General Assembly High-Level Week, and in other relevant multilateral fora, and following up on the ministerial level meeting with the P5, and considering the possibility of a heads of state engagement aimed at deepening support for the common African position and reinforcing Africa's unified stance. I extend my profound gratitude to all C10 member states for their unwavering commitments to the advancement of our shared continental interest. Your consistent support and active engagement are critical to the success of our collective endeavor. On behalf of His Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I once again extend a very warm welcome to all our distinguished guests and delegates. May your time in Freetown be not only productive, but also deeply enriching. Let us together carry forward a spirit of unity, dignity, and resilience that define our continent. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you to the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation for setting the stage of what this retreat is going to look like and why it is here. I will now call on His Excellency Salem Mustafa Mohammed, the State of Political Affairs and Security, the African Union.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me at the outset to express our appreciation and thanks to the government of Sierra Leone for hosting this important and timely retreat of the ambassadors and PRs of the African Union Committee of 10 heads of state and government on the reform of the United Nations Security Council in Addis Ababa and in New York. I wish to deliver the following remarks on behalf of His Excellency Ambassador Bankula Adoy, African Union Commissioner for Political Affairs and Peace and Security, and I quote, "I thank the coordinator of the African Union Committee of 10, Excellency Mr. Madabo, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, recent meeting at the sidelines of the 38th Ordinary Session of the African Union Assembly in February 2025. During the said summit, our heads of state and government, in their wisdom, reviewed the activities of the C10 on United Nations Security Council reform. They noted the continued support for the common African position by many UN member states and re-emphasized the need for African countries to stay united on the reform of the Security Council and for Africa to speak with one voice during this process. The objectives of our retreat today, in short, to strategize and strengthen our common engagement, continued commitment, and build a robust coalition to make the aspiration of our continent the United Nations Security Council reform. Excellencies, despite all these tremendous and tireless efforts, the Security Council reform process, starting from the open-ended working group till the IGN process, does not see significant substantial progress. We have to acknowledge that today we need to act beyond the classical stand to move our project. The African Union has been a fundamental actor in the enforcement of peace and security on the continent. However, the challenges posed by Africa's limited representation in the United Nations restricted the ability of the African Union to deliver active and concrete conflict resolution. The quest of United Nations Security Council reform is a legitimate demand as we make efforts to support conflict resolution in Africa. It is impossible to disassociate it from the UN peace operations largely concentrated on the continent and implemented by Security Council. Reforming the Security Council is not only urgent, but essential for the future of the United Nations and global governance. The current structure, characterized by inequities and the lack of democratic representation, undermines the credibility, effectiveness, and legitimacy of the Security Council. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa has overcome numerous challenges in the past from which the continent can gain lessons as it gears up to build the Africa we want and the Africa we deserve. We have overcome civil wars. We silenced colonial guns and apartheid through colonization, ideological divide in the forms of the Cold War, which in Africa became a hot war. That's why we support any efforts to maintain peace and security in Africa. These efforts are guided by our common resolve to strengthen the presence of Africa in the international fora and by building partnerships, solidarity, and friendships among our countries and with other countries in the world. Excellency, for us to come up with a new resulted-based approach, especially as everyone agrees on three key facts: that Africa deserves to have full membership at the United Nations Security Council, not least because of the number of African member states that make up United Nations General Membership. Second, the sheer size of population in Africa. And thirdly, more than 60% of the Council's business is exclusively on and about African issues. In addition, our full membership G20 is an acknowledgement by the international community that legitimately should lead to full membership of the United Nations Security Council. Excellencies, our call for comprehensive reform is a demand for fairness and a necessary step toward achieving a truly equitable international governance structure. By expanding the Security Council's membership at least to 26 seats, we can ensure that Africa is adequately represented. Excellencies, we must remain mindful that Africa and African people are waiting impatiently for a meaningful reform of the United Nations Security Council to meet the realities of the world today. That's why efforts shall continue to achieve this goal to secure the demands of Africa as articulated in Leone Consensus and CERT Declaration, 2 permanent and 2 non-permanent seats in the Security Council. This can never be reached if we don't remain unified and independent. End of quote. I wish full success for the retreat. I thank you for your kind attention.
Next, for joining your voice to the fact that we need to unite, work together. I want to thank you. We're going to have a statement now by His Excellency the Chief of the Cabinet of the President, 9th session, United Nations.
Executive, President of Sierra Leone, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to address you today on behalf of the President of the United Nations General Assembly at its 79th session. Let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to the government of Sierra Leone for its generous support in facilitating my attendance. It is very important. The President of the General Assembly is very interested in this process for a number of reasons. One, he is an African. He is the candidate that the continent put on this seat. Two, on assuming his functions, he made Africa a priority. Priority in all domains. Either we're talking of development, that is why development, working very hard to position Africa as a force in the negotiation of the upcoming summit on financing for development, Sevilla, Spain, in July. He would also be organizing in the coming weeks an interactive dialogue at the General Assembly focusing on peace and security in Africa, and in particular looking at how African Union-led peace operations can be financed through the regular budget of the United Nations in accordance with the Security Council resolution adopted in 2023. As the presidency, we have to do everything that is possible. On the political sphere, the president is very committed to the C10 process. He was with you, Mr. President, in Addis, February, when you had a summit there, made a contribution to that. He has asked me to come here and share his views with you and encourage you in this process. Calls for reform of the Security Council are growing both louder and very urgent because of the circumstances the international community, the world experience. The urgency becomes all the more pronounced as the Council remains deadlocked in response to conflicts around the world, including those on the African continent. As you know, the Council adopted a resolution which is called the Veto Initiative, which allowed the General Assembly to take over that when a veto is passed in the Security Council. This reinforced role of the General Assembly is very much part of the reform process that is underway. The Council must be able and willing to deliver on its mandate of ensuring peace and security across the world. The critical element of that is delivering reform that reflects greater representation. In September last year, world leaders gathered in New York and adopted an important document, second only to the Charter of the United Nations. That document is part for the future. And as we heard, His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Sierra Leone, referring to that, it marked the first time the international community explicitly asked that Africa needs to be compensated for the historical injustices that it's been victim to. So the pact lays out a vision to revitalize multilateralism and build a fairer, more equitable world. Delivering on that vision requires confronting and correcting the injustice of the past. So in that spirit, the pact affirms the historical injustices committed against Africa and the urgent need addressed. The Security Council and the injustices there on Africa is just one area. Our continent has suffered many injustices. But we are here to look at that injustice regarding the Security Council. Because when the United Nations was founded in 1945, Africa was denied proper representation on the Security Council. That wrong was not corrected. When the Council was even expanded in 1965, even though in 1965 there were many African countries that had gained into it, but that wrong wasn't corrected. Africa must play a more visible and influential role in the Council's work. And like my friend from the UN Commission, AU Commission just underlined, most of the work of the Council is on Africa. More than 60% of the work of the Council is on Africa. The momentum generated, therefore, by the Pact for the Future has breathed new life into the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform. The President of the General Assembly, who has sent me here, is the custodian of this process, the intergovernmental negotiation on the Council. And as an African, he wants things to happen for this country. Those negotiations are now focused on producing a consolidated model with a written proposal that clearly defines the role Africa must assume on the Council. And the President is bent on having this happen by September 2025. But the Chair cannot move forward with a consolidated model without from Africa. The Chair is the ambassador of Kuwait. There were two, Austria, but now it's just Kuwait. Just before I left New York, we had extensive meeting, and I would later in my presentation tell you what is outcome. Time is of the essence, as the President of the General Assembly emphasized during his meeting with the heads of state of the Committee of 10 in Addis in February on the margins of the 38th session of the African Union. That meeting, held under the chairmanship of His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, reflected a shared agreement among all participants on the urgent need for reform. The President is hopeful that meaningful action to advance Africa's representation on the Council will be taken during this 9th session of the General Assembly. But that cannot happen without you, members of the C10. It cannot happen. So I strongly urge you to seize every opportunity to agree on an African model. It's the way to go There are already a number of models that have been submitted to us, and Africa is not there, and Africa is the one that needs it the most. And from the vantage point where we sit, we believe that the world cannot recognize the historical injustice that has been levied on the continent, and we don't seize the opportunity to hold the world accountable, to hold the world by what it has said and make things happen. So the model should be one that can be submitted to the membership as part of the intergovernmental negotiation during this session. Let me assure you, the President of the General Assembly stands ready to support this process, including through informal discussions with Africa and other member states. That support extends to the upcoming ministerial level meeting in Zambia in June. Indeed, when the President met with the C10 ambassadors in New York, many of you were there, and this was in March, several important points were raised. One, that this is not only Africa's burden. Two, that all member states share responsibility for correcting this historical injustice. Three, that greater clarity is needed on how others will support Africa in the context of Guinea reform. Even so, I believe Africa can take a major leadership role in council reform this year, not by waiting for others to act, but by showing boldness, by coming together around a common model and placing faith in the process, just as done with the Uzulwini Consensus and the State Declaration, which call for Africa to be granted permanent seats, 5 non-permanent seats on the Security. Let Africa take up pen. Let Africa shape its own future and contribute decisively to global peace and security. I am here to listen on how the President and his office can best support you in realizing these aims. But let me add that the President has a number of initiatives supported. In the coming weeks, he will be meeting with the P5, individually and collectively, continue to plead Africa case, hold them accountable to the admission that has been described in the Pact for the Future. And he is doing so because he has also started the implementation of the Pact for the Future. Some of you who are in New York probably participated in the first interactive dialogue in March, which brought entire 193 countries to reflect on the means of implementation of the Pact. Next month, on the 19th, he will be bringing the entire membership again reflect on the measurability of the implementation of the Pact, and therein lies action thought which meets the historical injustice on the continent and how things can happen. The President of the General Assembly has also
Can you drop your cross and follow me?
the chair of the intergovernmental negotiation process produce even a draft consolidated model for September. And this is going to happen, and we hope count you, C10 members, to make this happen by contributing to the process, because as we have heard, the two speakers before me emphasize on unity. Unity is needed. Africa has what it needs for this moment. Africa has a sealed declaration, the Leone consensus, Oyala, everything is there just for you to put it together. And I believe that from the vantage point of being in the office of the President of the General Assembly, dealing with all member states on this particular issue, the time has come for Africa to seize the momentum and make good use of it. And talking about unity, yes, unity is good. We must make good use of what we have. But like Daniel Defoe said, in vain, sit still and wish for what we had. We must act. The moment is now. Conditions are right for it. We've been talking to key member states. They're all favoring Africa. We just need to look for ways, bold, and move ahead. Excellencies, you are not alone in this process. We are galvanizing support out there for this action you're going to take, and we really hope that this meeting here in Sierra Leone, here in this beautiful city of Freetown, will produce very forward-looking outcomes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cabinet. One thing that runs through all the three speakers is the need to correct the justices of the past of African representation on the Security Council. There is a need and a call for unity, and the time to act is now. So the ball is in our court, everything is ready, Africa have to move to get this done. His keynote address and the opening of the retreat by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, Dr. Julius Maada Bio, and I'm honored and privileged to invite him to make his welcome statement.
Let's sit down, please. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, representative of political affairs, peace and security of the African Union Commission, the Chief Minister and Ministers of Government, honorable members of Parliament present here today, Chef de Cabinet, Office of the President of the UN General Assembly, C10 permanent representatives in Addis Ababa and New York, members of the diplomatic and consular corps present in Sierra Leone, resident in Sierra Leone, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm delighted to warmly welcome all of you to Freetown, the capital of the Republic of Sierra Leone, your home for the next few days as we convene for this important retreat of the permanent representatives of the African Union Committee of 10 on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, commonly called C10. I wish to express on behalf of the government and people of Sierra Leone, my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for honoring our collective responsibility to advance Africa's interest on the global stage.